Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lamont, and welcome to NYO Canada Online Workshops. Our YouTube live chat is open, and we will be fielding questions throughout the workshop, so please feel free to post any comments, questions, and of course, chat amongst each other. Today's presenter is a renowned artist manager representing the likes of Philip Chu, Cameron Crossman, Jonathan Crow, and the Griffin Trio, to only name a few. As well, he's a graduate lecturer at both the Glenn Gould School and the University of Toronto. Please welcome Andrew Kwan.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm really fortunate to have a wonderful administrator, a wonderful timpanist, wonderful artist, wonderful person, Allison Bent, who is the Assistant Personnel Manager with Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Today's talk, and I hope you have lots of questions for both Allison and myself following. I will also be touching on the topic of biography writing. As Chris and Jonathan and I were discussing the structure of the 2020 with Andrew, we thought it'd be great to have a forum where industry guests can come in. Last week we had Cameron Crossman. This week we have Allison. But also it was important for us to give you some nuts and bolts of the industry. So many young emerging musicians like yourselves often ask about how to write a biography. So that will be our presentation after Allison is done with her talk. So Allison, I can easily do an introduction about you. I've known you for a number of years, but I'm going to ask you, welcome. Thank you for joining. I never asked, were you an alumni of the NYO?
I am. I'm alumni 2012 NYOC. Sorry, 2011.
2011, okay, so you know the drill, you know the program. Little background about yourself. Where are you from? What got you into music? What instruments, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I'm from originally Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I was born and raised. And I did not come from a musical family, but I'm a product of what was at the time an amazing Halifax all-city music program. So I was able to start violin at a really young age, singing choirs from the age of 5, and then also started percussion at about grade 5. And since then, that's sort of been my main love is percussion. I kind of petered out of violin around age 18.
Our listeners might have missed what instrument you ended up focusing on. It just glitched when you said that.
Oh, sorry. It's percussion. I mean, I mostly play timpani, but I started out on all percussion instruments.
Ah, very cool, very cool. So, what was your history, your lineage, your education? Where did you study? What academic career path did you choose?
I, growing up, really wanted to go to the University of Toronto to study with the members of Nexus. They're a world famous percussion group. And I was fortunate enough to do so. So I did my Bachelor of Music in Percussion Performance at U of T, then went on to study with a man named Tom Freer at Cleveland State University. So I did my master's degree of performance percussion in Cleveland, Ohio. After that, I made my way back after a year of performing in orchestras in the US. I made my way back to Toronto and did my artist diploma at Glen Gould School.
Very good. So after you graduated from the Glen Gould School, which the artist diploma program, and for those who are listening, that is actually where I met Allison. Allison was a top student in my class of artist diploma communications, and I've known her since then. And full disclosure, after a few years, I bumped into Allison again, who, through mutual friends of my roster, I represent a percussion quartet by the name of Torque. They had suggested I should consider Allison as a wonderful staff, and I knew some of her former bosses at other administrative arts institutions that she worked at, and so I got to work with Allison for a number of years. Between that and we'll talk about you coming over to the administrative life, but you graduated, you were in Toronto, you had timpanis in your trunk. What was the gigging scene like?
For me, I was really lucky in the connections I had and the people that I studied with. I was able to start off really early, performing with some really amazing orchestras like the TSO, the COC, the National Ballet of Canada. I went to Winnipeg a bunch. So I was really lucky right off the bat, performing with some extraordinary orchestras. But of course, at the same time, I'm also doing whatever gigs came my way, big and small. But like I say, I started off very lucky.
And when you say big and small, I think students often are aware of the larger organizations because they're studying with some of the key personnel, orchestral personnel in that city, and so they know the Vancouver Symphony, they know the Calgary Phil, etc. When you say small, how does one etch out a living? And you were by that time pretty much planted in Toronto, living in Toronto.
I was living in Toronto, and I mean, we're very fortunate being in Southern Ontario in that there's a lot of smaller orchestras like Niagara Symphony, Windsor Symphony, KW. We've got Kingston. And then of course, there into the Quebec side, there's also some playing opportunities, or even if you have a work permit, playing in Buffalo and that whole area, there's lots of work to be had. But like I say, even in Toronto, there's a lot of smaller institutions that are wonderful to play for.
So when you're, how do you connect with those institutions? How, you mentioned you were lucky to be studying with some of the professionals. How did you end up learning about, I gather you didn't study with Windsor Symphony's timpanists or percussionists guys. How do you end up making those connections?
Yeah, I know you talk about this a lot, Andrew, in your class, but it's really looking at your peers and your colleagues that you have that are your age and maybe a little bit ahead of you. It's a lot of word of mouth, which makes this a very interesting industry. Those smaller orchestras don't really hold auditions per se in order to play as an extra. So it's really based on your reputation and people who've heard you play in other places, and they say, you know what, let's give them a chance. And they get you in once, and if you do well, then you get to keep on coming.
Interesting. So from that point of view, for that, of course, you're now assistant personnel at the Toronto Symphony, sort of the pinnacle of jobs that every person listening hopes one day they can score a job with Toronto or score a job with Montreal. Those are the two in our country here. And then, of course, from there, Berlin, Phil, and Vienna are a toss-up. But, until we get to those levels, what made you stand ahead of, you said play well and hope, when they give you that opportunity. What were some of the other things that you were aware of as a first timer with Windsor Symphony, a first timer with Kingston Symphony? What are some of the things that you tried to do to ensure that you would get invited back?
Yeah, those are all really important points, and it's not an exact science. However, one thing I've seen just over and over again in my own career and the careers of friends of mine and other colleagues is that basically showing up prepared to do the job and being easy to work with. Those are the two main points that I can make, and you'd think that they're a given and that everyone does them, but unfortunately, I've seen it over and over again, people not do those two things well.
Good, very good advice, and unfortunately that is the reality of the different characteristics of all of us. So you are now the assistant personnel manager of Toronto Symphony, and for those of you who are aware, David Kent is one of the very few, I would say, in this country who's a orchestral member / administrator position. Most are either or. You're either a player or you are in the dark side, as they say. So welcome to the dark side. Welcome to, I guess I kind of opened the door when I hired you, but you're now full-time administrator with the Toronto Symphony. What made you decide that?
A few things. It was something that was sort of whirling around in my thoughts as I was taking auditions with orchestras after my master's degree. I, for one, I realized as I was taking all these auditions in really small US cities and towns and over Canada that I realized that I had envisioned my life in a big metropolis, like a city like Toronto. And I knew that sort of basically I wasn't willing to go where the job was going to take me. And the job was probably going to take me to some place like Fort Wayne, Indiana. And that was if I was lucky. So I kind of did a pivot and I thought, you know what, I also love working with people and managing artists. And I was an organized person. I didn't mind doing the sort of organizational work that came with a performing career. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to I started as a volunteer intern at the Canadian Opera Company, and I loved it. And I sort of weaved my way through there.
And do you feel, I know we're going off script a bit, do you feel like you're missing a calling, the artistic calling, the musical vocation that you trained? And for those of you who have just signed on, I'm speaking with Allison Betts of the she's assistant personnel manager of the Toronto Symphony. And those of you who might not have caught, Allison actually went to Cleveland State University studying with a sort of a percussion timpanist guru. For those of you who know the names of the Paul Cantors, of the Bill Vermeulens, of Frank Morelli's, of the Paul Cantor type, Tom Freer, definitely his reputation precedes him, and his studio graduates hold titles, hold positions in orchestras around the world. And Allison was one of those wonderful students of Tom's, and so we're continuing. And I'm asking Allison if she misses the artistic vocation now that she's the position that you're in with Toronto Symphony is a full-time position. It's not a part-time, obviously.
No. Yeah, my position with the TSO is more than full-time, actually, on an average week. But no, that's how I know I'm doing the right thing, is that now that I'm around the job, I mean, meaning I see the people who have the jobs of principal percussion, principal timpani, all of that stuff. And I don't envy it. It's not something that I long to have anymore. There was a time where that was all I wanted, but that's not the case for me. I mean, I get to be surrounded by really incredible artistry, and I get to be part of that. And on the flip side, I also get to play. I get to play basically as much as I want if I have room in my schedule to take gigs. So I'm kind of have an embarrassment of riches in that sense, is in that I get to do kind of everything I like within sort of a diverse career.
Thank you. It's so true. You know, I hear so many friends who say, "Oh, we're starting our kids up in music," and they always say, "Oh, you know, not that I expect them to go into music." And my position has always been, I hope they don't go into music. I just want them to be audiences of our music. You know, we definitely need the balance of people who are performers and balance of great arts administrators who understand the culture, who understand the language, the vocabulary of this specific art form that we're all pursuing. So,
and there might be, sorry to interrupt, and there might be some people who in listening to this broadcast right now that might not know what personnel management is. So maybe I'll clarify that it's basically managing all of the musicians in the orchestra that you're a part of. So if that means for the TSO, 93 musicians, David, Kent, and I manage, and it's a neat career in that you have to have the skills that you all have, which are the repertoire and knowing what it takes to be a musician and playing at that high level. But then on the flip side, you also need to know how to work with people and manage artists and administrate, and that's sort of why it's a neat job for me. And I feel like I really sort of found my calling in that sense.
Oh, that's fortunate. That's very fortunate. So when you say manage people, of course there are the 93 that are in the orchestra, and the reason why this NYO Canada exists and continues to exist is the preparation of emerging young orchestral players into the marketplace. And at the professional level, that consists of something called the audition process. I guess by now this is your 6th year at Toronto Symphony. I might be losing count.
Yeah, I'm entering my 6th year. Yeah.
Right. I gather you have been to a couple auditions then? You've set up a few auditions. Can you pull back the curtain and leave the screen there and tell us about the audition process, what it's like, how it starts?
Absolutely. Auditions are part of my job. I manage them from the beginning right until the very end when someone's hired. Sometimes on a given year, I can have 13 or 14 of these professional auditions for the TSO, and that can be a lot. So for any of you who have applied, thank you very much. And for those who have yet to audition for the TSO, it's a process where you submit your resume, and I know that maybe Andrew's going over your biographies, but maybe you guys also go over your resumes as well. So the personnel department, myself, and also a committee of audition committee made up of TSO musicians. They review your resumes and decide whether, basically, frankly, whether you're worth listening to, and we invite you to come in and play at the hall. And so the committee, which is made up of various players, sit behind a screen, so you don't see them and they don't see you, and you play your round of given excerpts.
How many are on the committee, or is that instrument pending, or is that position pending? So if it's a principal bass, sorry, I haven't been keeping up with your postings. So continue.
Yeah. So I think a misconception of young musicians is that they are getting up an audition to play for a bunch of people who play their instrument. And I can tell you the reality is maybe 1 or 2 people on that panel play your instrument. So that's why mock auditions are so important as preparation and to play for a variety of different instrumentalists. Don't just, if you play violin, don't just play for violinists. That's really important. So these committees are, let's say you are auditioning for, let's say, a woodwind instrument. You've got probably the woodwind principals on that committee, plus the concertmaster, plus some other, you know, maybe you've got a couple of brass players and conductor, of course. But sometimes the conductor is only brought in way late in the process. So at least at the TSO. So really, you are there to impress just a mix of members of the TSO. So it's you can't rely on someone knowing the ins and outs of your instrument when you're auditioning. So if you've got, you know, a reed that's not working for you that day, half the panel unfortunately don't realize what a bad reed or a good reed sounds like. They just know what they do and don't like.
Interesting. There's a Leo. There's a question that Leo popped up, and perhaps I'll read it. Are there any skills or insight that you've gained from your administrative experience that you could have helped in your previous performance life?
I don't, for me, not personally, because that was the part I was really good at. But what would have helped me in, and we can get into this, I think we're going to probably get into questions later as well, but what would have helped me in my earlier performance life was diversifying the type of music I was playing. I think I would have had a lot more opportunities if I had been not so focused, laser focused on winning an orchestral job, to be frank.
Interesting. Hopefully that helps Leo, and definitely if you need a little bit more explanation or have another question, please just pipe in and write your question in the comments. So assume that you do win a coveted position. What are the expectations? You're in the orchestra. What happens?
So for your first 2 years, and this is also the case in many other orchestras as well, that you're part of a tenure process. So you're being constantly reviewed, sort of on a every 4 months you have a review meeting where a committee decides, you know, if you're on the right track or not. But at that time, I mean, I think a lot of younger players are a bit shocked when they arrive in a new orchestra because of the volume of music that's expected of them to have learned and play. Sometimes we have at the TSO up to 3 programs that are completely different in repertoire in a week, and it's just a lot of music coming on your stand. So, and when you're young, it's all new to you. Maybe you will have played some of the really standard big works, but most of that stuff you won't have played, and so it's a lot of practicing in your first few years until you get a bit of this repertoire under your belt.
And then,
but also you're just basically.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, and coming prepared is just basically a huge part of going to be at home in your preparation. And once you get onto the stage, it's go time, and you kind of have to already have notes under your fingers.
Can you just repeat that? You glitched out, at least on my side.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know what part you missed, but just that a lot of your preparation, it's all going to be at home. It's very frowned upon to be practicing your notes backstage or even on stage, waiting for rehearsal to start. A lot of people, there's not much warming up actually that goes on at big orchestras like that.
It's funny. There used to be a urban myth about a former executive director of the Toronto Symphony and I'm aging myself obviously because these are the ghosts of the past, and he used to see when the music was picked up from the library to sort of see the commitment of the musicians. So thank you. Are there any other expectations? Here you are, you for the first 2 years you're under review before you are appointed tenure or given tenure. Are there any other expectations? What is life like in an orchestra?
Sure. Yeah. There's the musicians are unionized, and therefore they operate under their own what's called a collective bargaining agreement or a master agreement. So there's a lot of committee work that's involved in being a musician. During your time there, you'd have to be part of tenure review committees, audition committees. We expect a lot of our musicians in terms of, especially right now, with our concert hall being closed, a lot of online activity, and you're generally just expected to be a good spokesperson for the organization out in the world. But so there is a fair amount of work involved that's not on stage.
What other committees are there? You mentioned audition. You mentioned are there, and how are they assigned? Is there just a general rotation of them, or?
I mean, it's supposed to be based on volunteer, but I think a lot of them are sort of voluntold to be part of some of these committees. There's actually we have audition committees. We've got a media committee actually who sort of manages the orchestra's involvement in the media. There's what's called the orchestra committee, or a players committee. Any orchestra that you're part of will have one of those, and that's sort of the group of people that are your voice as a musician to management. So management and the orchestra committee are always in constant communication about what's going on in the orchestra.
Wow. 2 questions then. In your position as in the Department of Personnel Managers, Assistant Personnel, do you have an association? Do you have a connection, a network of personnel managers across the country? Do you know who they are? Do you guys talk to each other? So you know where I'm going with this conversation. So
we absolutely do. We absolutely do talk to each other. So the orchestra personnel manager, we call it's an orchestra personnel manager conference, but it's a community that we have, and we're in constant communication. So we have an email thread, and it's all of North America, and we're always going back and forth pretty much daily with questions. We all go through the same stuff, and then once a year we get together and we have a little conference. It's not a fancy conference. It's basically just a room full of us around doing 8-hour roundtable discussions and hashing out issues. But they're a really amazing community of people, and I really appreciate the insight that they've given me over the years.
That's fantastic, and I think it's one area which, as students, as emerging young artists are entering the industry, I hope they start to realize, if there's anything I can relay during these 4 sessions, is how small this network is. Yes, it's North America, and though the saying is 6 degrees of separation, in this industry, if you're farther than 2 degrees, I think you don't know anybody. Normally within, A, B, C, and you should be able to reach whoever it is that you need. And sort of foraying that term reaching, perhaps not so much in your role and your duties, but the musicians, what is their requirements or expectation for them to do community engagement and community outreach, community relevance? As personnel manager, you would know, what do they need to do? What are they doing? And definitely in this time of digital teaching and digital relationship, it's changed a bit. But up until March 15th, what were their responsibilities?
To be honest, this is something that the TSO is trying to improve upon. I think over the last few years, our community engagement a bit waned, and there wasn't much expected of our musicians in terms of being out in the community. However, that's majorly changing, and that's something that that's one of our big pillars that we're working toward is becoming more engaged with our audiences, and for people who also don't get to come to Roy Thompson Hall, and engaging them in what we do, and having a connection and communication with those communities. So, like I said, there's hasn't been a lot expected of musicians in the past, but that's very, very, very much changing over the next few years.
Great. So are you still playing? Like, other than going to conferences with other personnel managers across North America and on eThreads, are you still playing? And how do you balance that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm playing. Yeah, I'm a person who likes to be busy. So usually if it's a weekend and I'm not required to be at Roy Thompson Hall, I'm usually at a gig somewhere. So I'm able to now, freelancing is no longer the bulk of my income or my work. So I'm able to sort of better pick and choose the opportunities that I take. And they're different than maybe what you might think that they are. I don't tend to go play as much for the bigger orchestras, as I actually really enjoy playing for a lot of the smaller groups, and being part of that more freelance scene that I was before. So it's I get to choose the music I want to play and who I want to play it with, and I don't have to necessarily take every gig that comes my way.
It's a huge hurdle. I see that with many artists over the years who have taken that administrative role. That's when you end up not having that foundation income, then as you say, every gig that comes your way, you're taking it because it goes towards your rent, it goes towards your mortgage, it goes towards your car payment, whatever it may be. And then sadly, this is where, and I don't want to sound cynical, and I don't want to show that aspect, because the organism of orchestral playing to me is just so amazing. But the notion that you have to take the gig because you're worried that they won't call you back, you're in a real negative space there. And so when you have that luxury, and it's really interesting that the first thing you said was, now I take the gigs with the interesting repertoire, with the interesting colleagues, and nowhere did you say, because I needed the money. And that's a really wonderful position, in my view, philosophically. And hopefully, I use this example in my class. If I spoke to your parents 40 years ago and said in front of Loblaws that in 40 years, you're going to go in there and pick up some clothes and pick up some pharmacy and buy your insurance and do your banking, they would look at me like, no, this is called the grocery store. And I normally say this for my last class, for my last session. But if you look at the teachers that you're studying with, and if they happen to be principals of an orchestra in your town, how many revenue streams, how many paychecks are they collecting? So exactly what Allison has talked about. There's two questions that popped up, Allison, and I know I'm keeping you longer. Could you briefly go into...
Oh, no, I'm happy to be here as long as you need me to.
Oh, thank you. Could you briefly go into what a panel might look for when assessing a musician's resume? Are there any common red flags that hurt someone's application?
That's a really, really good question. I see a lot of resumes and I have to go through them really, really quickly. So what I'm looking for, I look at education. Certain where you went to school, unfortunately, sometimes matters. And then your your orchestral experience. So I think people need to be not so concerned about specifics with their resume. I think sometimes people say, I played with this orchestra in this month, this month, this month, this month. We don't care. Just say basically sort of where you've played and maybe a year. And if you've held any contract positions, that usually puts you above the rest. That means that somebody actually hired you for a job and you were able to keep it. But it's better that you not go into really great detail about every single gig you've ever had, because it'll just sort of people will get tired of reading it and they'll just sort of put it in the next pile. So it's good to just be very clear of the opportunities you've had. So if it's orchestra opportunities you've played, maybe some chamber, maybe some awards you've won, and your education, that's kind of all we need.
And I know this sounds extremely vain, but cosmetics of the resume? I know we don't have
not really that important.
Is Toronto Symphony doing an online application, or is it a still PDF version, or is it? Because I know corporate Canada, corporate America is a web-based portal where you fill in, and so your fonts don't matter and your spacing don't matter. But what about you guys?
We're not there yet. It's still a PDF that people submit through online channels. But I mean, as long as it's clear and concise, that's really all that matters. Don't include a photo that automatically is bad because we are trying to keep this whole process anonymous, or as anonymous as possible.
Interesting. Matine Mary, how does a major Canadian orchestra like TS make the majority of its revenues through the ticket sales, donors, government supports? How does this vary with smaller orchestras in the U.S.? Allison, you can jump into this. I can also share a bit as well.
Yeah, Andrew, you definitely have the information on this. I mean, from what I can gather, most of the time it's sort of a 30%, 30% sort of split between ticket sales and donations and government funding. I'm not involved in that aspect that much. All I do is spend the money and hire lots of extras and all sorts of stuff. So I don't have to make the money, fortunately. But I mean, we do know that it can be frustrating comparing ourselves as the Toronto Symphony to a place like Boston or Chicago or New York, where they have quite a different funding strategy that involves a much bigger endowment than the Toronto Symphony does. So we struggle a little bit compared to those orchestras, but I'll let Andrew sort of speak to the smaller orchestras.
Definitely here in Canada, you're correct. It's sort of 30, 40, 30% ticket sales, 30% donation sponsorship, and 40% government. The big difference in the U.S. is that they don't have that 40% government support. They're much more. There's always a bit of government support, but it's more 20, 40, 40, 20. 50, 30, 30%. The smallest percent is always the ticket revenue. In the U.S., Allison mentioned some of the bigger, as we call them, AA orchestras. Philadelphia, if I remember correctly, has a endowment amount of $250 million. So for those of you who have a savings account, if you're making 3% return on $250 million, that can pay for a really big new music festival at absolutely no risk of having to worry about the 30%. The US, because of how they are and how they develop, the idea of philanthropy is a lot more ingrained than it is here in Canada. So as a result, most of the nonprofit organizations, whether that be concert series or symphonies or museums, they're all trying to raise a lot of money. And of course, it's a little bit different provincially as well. As I rudely say, it's great to be an artist in Quebec, but just don't get sick. Um, Governments make X number of dollars through property taxes, income taxes, and they can spend on, they choose where they want to spend. And if you think about Canada and all the new concert halls which have opened in the past 15 years, and we think about Montreal with their new Symphony Hall, it seems amazing that in this day and age, 2020, 2010, 2015, that Montreal was the only hall to not have a lead title on it. If we think about it, the name Roy Thompson Hall, right? Because Roy Thompson's estate gave money 35 years ago, or the Chan Center in Vancouver, and of course, the big renaming of in New York, the Giffen Hall. So that hopefully can share a bit of information with you. Delia put a question. Would love to hear an answer to that. I'm not sure which question you're referring to, so please.
I think she had an arrow that was pointing up. I think it was the same question that you just answered.
Oh, okay. Smaller orchestras. It's nice to have known people in this industry over the years. There was a gentleman by the name of Jeff Alexander, and he for I think 12 years ran the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and he recently was appointed this other orchestra in the U.S. by the name of Chicago Symphony. And I was talking to Jeff shortly after he moved down to Chicago, and I think he jokingly said, it's the same issues, just a few more zeros at the end of the budget. So orchestras, as Allison alluded to, the issues that she faces with Canada's largest orchestra are the same issues that Boise Symphony would encounter, or Guelph. It's, at the end of the day, we're in an industry where every organization is trying to find the best player within their budgets. And how does that budget come? Well, it comes from, as Mateen asked, it comes from ticket sales, it comes from donors, it comes from the sponsors, it comes from the government, and you can only spend so much. And of course, the whole infrastructure of an orchestra is more than we can really get into in 40 minutes, but no different than what's in your wallet, Mateen. You have X number of dollars. You can choose to go to 3 restaurants, or you can choose to go to 2 better restaurants, or you can blow it all on one fantastic restaurant. But then if you go to one fantastic restaurant, then you're not buying new suits, so et cetera, et cetera. So any other questions for Allison? Thank you so much. I guess I'll ask a question that probably many kids are thinking of but are afraid to type in. What advice would you give them? You've been at the forefront of the biggest orchestra in this country, or I'm not sure, Toronto, Montreal always fights for that title. And you've seen X number of appointments, you've seen X number of retirements, you've seen, I'm not sure in this period, have you seen any who have been let go? I don't need to go there, but you see a lot of subs coming in, you're hiring the subs. Anything you'd like to share? But before you do that, Allison, I heard you mention you started as an intern at the CLC. Well, if you want to work for my company, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, internships are a funny topic, in that I was, how how old was I? Maybe 24, no, 20, yeah, 23 or 24 when I did that internship. And to be completely honest with you all, it was through connections. I had worked as an usher on and off at the Four Seasons Center for 8 years. I started in 2006 during my undergrad there when the hall first opened, and the COC owns that hall. And so I just talked to people and I ingratiated myself, and I said, hey guys, when I came back from Cleveland, I said I'd love to work for free. Give me a job. So Nina Draganek, whom some of you may know, she ran for many years the free concert series, the one that happens at lunchtime at the Four Seasons Center. And I helped do really, small and large tasks and working with her, and I learned a ton. So like I said, it all comes back to connections and getting to know people and getting people to trust you.
And Hannah, one of the interesting things that as a company owner and a person that hires staff, I would never have thought of Allison if she didn't mention to clients of mine that she'd be interested in a position as an artist or as an artist representative, as an artist manager. And that's where I reconnected with Allison and at an outdoor concert in Toronto at Harbourfront. And I said, I heard you're interested. Let's meet up and talk more. And so Hannah, one of the advices that I can hopefully share with you is that most of us aren't thinking of you guys as an administrator, because that is not the career path that I'm meeting you as. And so if that is something you're interested in, as Allison mentioned, she started off as an usher. It was something to pay the rent while you were in undergrad, and something for, Friday nights outs with friends, income,
and also watch free opera and ballet every week.
Well, that too, of course. It surprises me. My company runs a concert series for the Glenn Gould School, and talking to the ushers, the number of ushers who are not musicians, and they're saying, why would I not love this job? I'm an actor, I'm in drama, I'm a visual artist, and I get to hear these top concerts. And I look around to see, where are the classical musician kids? And no one's taking a job. So and that's where perhaps Allison, right off the top, one can see while listening to her that she's coming from both sides, uses both sides of the brain, as they say. She has the administrative savvy and the artistic savvy to be studying with such top teachers as David and John and Tom Freer and rest in peace John and Russell and the gang. So thank you so much for your insight, your experience, sharing with these kids. Hopefully everyone learned something new and heard. Hopefully you demystified some of the so and so got a job because they knew somebody conversations. It is a screen process, and it is as fair as one can be. So thank you, Allison, and stay safe, wash your hands, and
thank you all so much for having me. And if anyone, I've got lots of other things to say if people want to get in touch with me and ask questions. I'm happy to answer questions for anyone who might have them. Maybe NYO, I can give them my my email if that's something that people are interested in.
Great, thank you, very generous. Thank you. Okay, thank you. In our conversations, I realize these are supposed to be 40 minutes. I'm pushing 50 right now. One of the conversations that a lot of young artists always ask me about is their biography writing. And as you can see with someone like Allison, and you will find out more and more in this industry, whether it's Chris, whether it's Jonathan, there has to be a level of administrative capability for you to move forward in this industry. The days of just being, great at the violin, great at your instrument, and you will be handed opportunities. It doesn't exist. One of the points that I caught that Allison had mentioned was she wished that she wasn't just laser sharp in her experience of repertoire development. I know that as a student of Tom Freer in Cleveland, you're very much, here's your Brahms, here's your Mahler, here's your contemporary composers, and you focus the excerpts. And Allison alluded to, I wish that I expanded, because the opportunities now are diverse. Are diverse in how you do. One of the things I remember in my course last year with the students at NYO was think about your instruments and the city that you're from. When was the last time a position opened for your instrument? I see names coming up on the board here, but I don't know who's watching right now. So from that point of view, as Allison also mentioned, that it was a personal choice in life where she wanted to live in a metropolitan city, and how many timpanous openings are there across this country. And as she said, assume that she got a job, and she'd be fortunate to get one. It would be in Fort Wayne, Indiana, or in Lewiston, Idaho, or something like that. So, as a result, one of the conversations that I feel I must need to, sorry about that, my Ring doorbell. One of the conversations that I need to share with you guys is a quick introduction to biography writing. Thank you, Chris. So, as all of you have gone to concerts, you read biographies. I realize that many of you will say things like, well, it kind of bores me. All biographies sound the same, look the same. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why agents and managers and publicists keep this format. I'm going to pop this all up quickly. We have to think about the biography, the purpose of the biography. And as harsh as this may seem, because on one side, you guys are in an orchestral training program, and the sum of the parts is greater than, no, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yes, the organism of the orchestra is the most important, and your personal, if you're third row in the violin section, you don't play over the concertmaster, you don't play as if you're the concerto soloist. But I'm going to take you out of that, and perhaps this conversation is not specific to trying to win a job. But until you do win a job, until you do manage to get into an orchestra, and for that matter, even if you are with orchestras in Hamilton Phil, Kitchener-Waterloo, or Kingston, Trois-Rivières, Drummondville, etc., Halifax, Nova Scotia, you have a lot of downtime. There's a lot of other things, and even people like in Toronto Symphony here, again, please forgive me, those in Quebec, and not disrespecting Montreal Symphony, but I think of three of my friends, Winona and Mary Berard, and they get Trio Arkel. They have enough time to run a concert series. Orchestra life is not the only thing you will be doing, and as a result, you will need a biography. What is the purpose of biography? It's to attract people. It's to make people go, wow. And to a certain level, I know that sometimes we banty about, oh, I'm going to do my master's here, and oh, I'm going to do my DMA at McGill, or my DMA at Toronto or Vancouver, and this is very common conversation. But we have to remember that those of us who are pursuing a master's, a doctorate, you are a very limited percentage of society. We are in an industry where we're surrounded by people like that. But if we forget, these are important points. What is the purpose of a biography? We want to attract people. We need people to go, wow, about what we've done. And yes, Allison mentioned that Toronto Symphony is doing a bit of catch up with their media and outreach engagements. You as a young artist, you as a young ensemble, you as a concert series need to think about these things. How do we attract audiences? How do we bring people to us? And until you are fortunate to be hired as a soloist, or you're in an orchestra where there is a marketing department, where there is a community outreach department, et cetera, you need to take these responsibilities. You need to fulfill the role of the administrators. So why do we need a biography? Who is going to see your biography? How is your biography being used? When should I write a biography? Purpose of a biography is to wow people, and you need it because people in the end, whether that someone has hired you for a concerto soloist position, obviously your biography is not used, and I shouldn't even say that anymore. If you go to the larger orchestras, if you go to even mid-sized orchestras who have the capacity to do so, they are interested in profiling the members of their orchestra. So your biography, even if you're in the Toronto Symphony or if you're with Kamloops Symphony, they need your biography because they want to show off how great you are. So why do you need one? Because it's going to get used, because people need to get to know you. Who is going to see your biography? Everybody. Everybody who, whether they're going to hire you or at the end of the day, there is a transactional purpose. People will say yay or nay, I'm interested or I'm not interested. So regardless of the result of what that interest may do for you, either I will buy your ticket or I will hire you, or I want to play with you, or et cetera, your biography serves a major purpose. Obviously, how is this going to be used? It's the first tool which concert organizations will use to try to draw people to your concert. And that concert organization may be an orchestra, maybe a chamber music series, maybe a recital series, or maybe your music director in your church. At the end of the day, if you are taking your instrument and performing and interpreting the music written 250 years ago, making it live and connecting with an audience, and I realize we're in a time of COVID distancing, but under normal circumstances, you want to draw people so that we can perform. So when should you write a biography? All of you should always have a biography. Always have it available. There is nothing in my office here that I do that you should not be able to do. This day and age of smartphones and iPads and laptops, you should always have a file folder called publicity materials, and there should be a biography in there. And when someone calls you up for it, that is not the time you write one. You should always have one. And I know none of us are traveling. We have a lot of downtime. Develop that biography. So, what can I quickly share with you? Template-wise, the three things I always want to see on a piece of paper: your name and your instrument. John Smith, violin, or Jane Doe, pianist, or Larry Black, cello, or whatever it is. Your name, your instrument, right off the top. So that at the end of the day, when someone picks up that piece of paper, they see your name right on the top. And your contact information. At the end of the day, you're sending out maybe not a printed hard copy, maybe it's a PDF, maybe it's whatever format you wish to use. It's within your electronic press kit, your EPK as we call it. It's going to be a piece of paper with your name, your biography, and your contact information, because you want people to be able to get in touch with you. At the end of the day, Leo, I will clean it up and make them available. At the end of the day, you want, if Allison is looking to hire a sub the ability for her to reach you guys. So your telephone number, your cell phone number, your email, website address. Obviously, some of these slides are geared for a soloist's career, which are level artists that I tend to work with. And a biography date. It's I realize it's sort of hard to explain this right now, but especially now with COVID and things which have been postponed and canceled from March until June, a lot of that stuff is going to get pushed into September 20 to June 21. There's conversation about safety and how do we reopen concerts for public. And so we're preparing for if concerts don't happen this September until December, that those concerts are going to get pushed into 21, 22. I am literally booking and holding dates for the concert season 22, 23. So literally 3 years from now. And just today, I was just doing an email with someone holding a period in March 2023. So what is the importance of the biography dates? I sent someone today, end of May 2020, a biography that is going to be used in a concert program in March 23. That's 3 years from now. Hopefully your biography has been updated. So the person who's retyping your biography for the concert program will see a biography dates and realize, hey, this is a really old biography. Through the contact information, they can email and say, can you please send me an up-to-date one? The reason why I asked Allison if cosmetics matters, I believe it still does. I realize that perhaps in her position as personnel manager, because there is an audition process, that there is a physical introduction to the candidates. But in the work that I am involved with, I seldom have that luxury where I can send the Griffin Trio to Edmonton to meet with the concert presenter in order for them to consider. It is based on the presentation package that I'm going to send them. So here's a bad example of sort of a 250-word biography, all squished into one big paragraph. Same biography, if I was to space it out and make it look nice, name, instruments, contact information is here, biography spread out. People ask me if they should put pictures into the biography. If you can do a nice picture, name, wrap around, again, contact information, and down here is what I call the biography date. I don't need May 27th, 2020 at 3:03. I apologize. I'm going on a bit. Just May 2020. I don't think anyone's biography is changing by the hour, by the day. My personal biggest beef with artists who print out biography with pictures is that most of the times the ones that I end up receiving is someone who doesn't know how to design and keep a high resolution picture in there. It tends to be blurry, or it tends to be disproportional. They dragged it, they squished it. They don't know how to import a picture. And then I often see the situation with, especially with color printers, that, and I'm sure all of you know what I'm talking about, the situation of where you're running out of the, in your inkjets, you're running out of red, so everything looks kind of greenish. Why would you ever send anything out that is subpar? If you want to do it on letterhead, if you want to make it look, at the end of the day, what is the purpose of this biography? You want people to be attracted to you. You want people to remember you. Would Nike ever put out an ad where you couldn't find the name, you couldn't find the swoosh? You are your own business, you're your own brand. At the end of the day, You want someone to remember the name Hannah. You want someone to remember the name Delia. You want someone to remember the name Leo. Whatever it takes, and it is a different mindset. But again, think of the competition. Even from the point of view of running shoes, we think about, if I said name me running shoe companies, everyone's going to say Nike, Adidas, Puma, and something else. Well, do you want to be something else? There are hundreds of shoe brands out there. You want to be Nike. You want to create it so that people remember who you are. Here is why we sort of feel, or if you've been reading a lot of biographies, why it feels like they're all the same. It's because it's the industry standard. It is the industry template that most of us use in the business. That first paragraph, you don't want to start off with Jane Doe started piano lessons at the age of 5 and then picked up a second instrument in high school orchestra. You want a wow factor. You want me to continue reading it so that I know who you are. So that first paragraph, you make sure you attract people. And then the second paragraph, you want to tell them that you're active, that you're alive, that, I can write a lot of wow factors for someone who's been dead for 10 years. Tell me of some of the upcoming things that you will be doing. Even, this season, Hannah Corbett will be attending National Youth Orchestra of Canada as a, anything to tell me that, oh, you're still active out there. And then talk about some of your past highlights. Again, it is a mental process. It is, there's a level of humility that we're taught to have. At the end of the day, as much as I hate to say it, there's one spot available. There's one opportunity for the emerging young artist. There's one opportunity for the classical music concerts. I sometimes laugh to think, the Tchaikovsky piano concerto. You're competing with every other pianist in the world. But then, from an artistic programming point of view, you can substitute that Tchaikovsky piano concerto with his violin concerto. On a program, artistically, for an audience's absorption, it's equally amazing. But then, hey, by the way, he also wrote a cello concerto. So not only is the pianist all of a sudden competing with all the other pianists, competing with every other violinist, and competing with every cellist. So how important is your biography if that is the first thing people are going to read? Past highlights, include those. And then at the end of the day, your personal information. So what are some of the things that we can talk about in the attract? Major competition wins. I'm sure many of you have read biographies that use as a quote. A quote is someone else's testimony about how great you are. I realize many of you don't have that, but if you have a great quote from, say, a Leon Fleischer or a Paul Cantor or a Yo-Yo Ma or someone that the general public knows, use it. Whatever it takes to make the person who's reading it say, oh, I want to continue reading this. So you want someone to attract, not the same old, currently in third year of an undergraduate program, or born in Regina, granted, wonderful city, but we're all born somewhere. What makes you stand out? Winner of the university's concerto competition, Jane Doe has been, so find whatever it takes. I don't know who you guys are. I don't have even the luxury of seeing your faces anymore. But think about what you can stand out from your peers to do that attract paragraph, opening paragraph. Upcoming, what are some things? Are you attending music festival? Are you attending, are you doing any interesting projects? Are you developing interesting repertoire? Are you going to be performing anywhere? Are you developing an ensemble? I'm not a big fan of people who say that they're preparing for the Queen Elizabeth competition because, again, this biography is going to be used in 2022 or 2023. And if you have that in there, what are people going to ask you? Oh, how did you do in the Queen Elizabeth? Of course, if you won, great. If you didn't, that's a little bit awkward. Past highlights, dig deep, truly dig deep. Again, I don't know who you guys are, but all of you have probably played in chamber music festivals, recitals. Again, as Allison said in her reading of a resume, if you've had a contract position, I want to see that someone else has hired you. Where have you played? But at the same time, be very careful. If you are fortunate to have played the Tchaikovsky Concerto with Guelph Symphony Orchestra, bravo, good. Then don't continue that sentence and say, and have also played with Kingston, Windsor, and Deep River. Because when I'm reading that, I feel that you've done concertos with all of those other orchestras. But if you've played in the orchestra and not a concerto position, separate that sentence, put a period, and then say you have also been a member of such and such an orchestra. So those are some of the past highlights. And then last but not least, your personal information. Where are you studying? Who have you studied with? What summer programs? A bit of personal, what are some of your hobbies? So those are some of the things that you can put into the personal aspect of it. Try to make it all fit into one page. Again, your biography, dates, month and year is suffice, and your contact information. So that's sort of, I'll wrap it up there. I've sort of really gone on a little too long. I apologize. Any questions? No? Okay. I will make these slides available, and I'll supplement it with a little bit more details about what I talked about, and Chris will figure out how to disseminate that to those who are interested.
Sounds great, Andrew. Thank you again for joining us and breaking down the importance of a good bio. As well, it was really great having Allison sharing that perspective from the admin side while still feeding her passion for music. So thank you for bringing her on and being with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.